is architect-driven architecture, which is a little bit of a mouthful, but really what it's about is I think a lot of people see that the profession itself is in a little bit of a crisis at the moment, that we are maybe losing a lot of our kind of traditional responsibilities are being taken up by other specialists, and we're losing maybe more and more of our influence over architecture and its building. So we in the debate committee wanted to organize a talk where we didn't just sort of complain about this, but maybe talk and get a group together of architects who are doing something different and not just working in this traditional client architect kind of way, but finding some kind of new ways to work, or to kind of carve out some new parts of the profession, which I think is very interesting. So I don't know, there's going to be so many people against it, or maybe there will. That'd be great if people are saying, no, we shouldn't be doing this, we should really be just sticking to what we know. So this is more of a talk, I guess, than a debate. But yeah, that's that. The panel today is it's really exciting. We're really happy to have Alexandra Olgaard from Stavanger, Jørgen Tycho from sitting in Oslo, and Lasse Kilvar, sorry, sitting in Oslo. I'll give them a bigger introduction as we go along. I think we'll maybe just sort of jump in, and the first kind of question I'm going to sort of start with you, Alexandra. You have worked in a lot of really interesting studios all over Europe, and also studied both in Denmark and Tokyo, before coming back to Norway and starting up your own studio, Alexandra Olgaard Architects. But on the way as well, you've also been involved in the Stavanger Arkitektforening. You've been president of NAL. You've been very involved in both politics and in media, and now you're also branching into property development with your brother. And I just wanted we've talked about this before, and about how in a way architects are trained to be kind of to see potential, that they are kind of like opportunists in a sense, and we're kind of taught to look for potential both in architecture or in a program or in a building material. And I kind of wanted to ask you, really, was it always a plan to sort of seek out potential in other ways of working, or to seek out other venues for architects to work in, or was it something that just sort of came along and then you followed where they went? I know that's a big question, but
yeah, thanks for having me here. Yeah, it's a big question. Let's see. No, I didn't plan for these other things I've been working with, really. When I left my last job in an architecture office was in 2012, when I left Herzog & Demmermann. And at that point, I was working on projects I was working on a project in Moscow. Before that, the project in Beirut, where we were, Herzog & Demmermann was the client, and I was working there to make projects, which was great. But when I came to Norway, I started to get really into urban planning, because I thought the cities weren't doing so great. So I just started to follow discussions on how the Stavanger region should organize public transportation, for instance. And I just kind of added my opinion, and from there a lot of things just kind of happened. But I think what I see when I do different things is that what we learn as architects is to really, it's never enough to just do one thing. Like when you do a building, you need a great plan, you need to deliver on the program, you have to have a great facade as well, materiality, functionality. The outside should be adding something to the surroundings. Like in architecture, there's always this really long lists of things you want to do. So it's a very complicated puzzle in a way to make all those things work. And I think it's the same in a lot of other things when it comes to concept development, that there are always so many different criteria that you need to respond to, whether it's a business plan or if it's early business development for a new building, or whether it's programming for architecture. It's never enough to just do one thing. And I think that kind of complex relationship of different criteria is something that architects are trained in, and it's very helpful in a lot of situations. So I think seeing the big picture is one thing that I see. It's really handy also in board work. If you're on a board, it's like really handy. And also what we're taught in architecture school, to imagine things that aren't there. Not everyone can do it. When you're an architect, or at least I thought that everyone could imagine things that aren't there, but we're kind of actually more trained than the average person. So I think this about seeing potential is something that hasn't been, I think we can see potentials in things that other people don't. Yeah. And I think that's really important in a lot of different arenas.
Okay, yeah, that's I think it's a combination as well of that, and maybe being somehow good mediators between different groups. So as well as seeing potential, you can start to communicate that potential to people, which is, I guess, the biggest other part of our job as architects is communicating. So yeah, that's really interesting. I want to sort of ask this similar question to you, Jørgen, because you are the founder of Oslo Tre. You've been involved in the production of lots of different timber elements, including CLT. One of the first, really, in Norway. You've been kind of a pioneer in this field, also developing sort of an indigenous industry for timber in Norway, while at the same time working as an architect, often producing the elements which you're using in the designs you design. So I kind of wanted to ask you as well, was that something that was the plan from the very first day, or was it something that kind of developed and you saw an opportunity in the market?
No, I cannot say it was the plan from day one. It was not. It was a series of happenings, but it was a plan from day one to work with sustainable architecture. And since my studies in early 2000s, I've been very into this and how we can use the climatic and the biological possibilities that we have, and and the potential that are in them hasn't been explored for the last century. So that I kind of brought with me back from studies and work abroad, and then to start working with timber, it just felt very natural in Norway. We have a long timber tradition. I mean, we've been building with timber since the beginning, and so that felt like the right material for this place on the planet.
Yeah, because in a way it's a very new model for architecture as a business, but I guess in a sense as well it's the original model that the people designing and building got the materials from nearby and kind of treated them in a way and used them. So in a sense as well, it's sort of going back to what architecture maybe was originally, or maybe was 100 years ago.
Yeah, I think kind of agree. I mean, the architect originally is the master builder. It's the one who knows all the aspects of the building, all the how every part is going to be put together. And I think it's also very important for an architect to know how to build and to actually be on the building site and work with the materials that we are designing with. And at least for our part, when we started, then we were kind of also a bit forced to build for ourselves, because there was not very, the market was so small, and none of the entrepreneurs or larger firms were willing to work with this kind of modern timber materials. So in a way, we kind of had to do a lot of our own projects, and we just continued with it because it's a lot of fun. And
yeah, because he kind of made, in a sense, the test projects, which then proved the rule later on. So you've kind of not only introduced a new product, but tested it in a sense and developed it into the market. So that's yeah, that's I think really fascinating that you've taken over such a large responsibility. So that's really, yeah, I think it's very inspiring. And then to go to you, Lasse, because to go from the kind of before the architecture to the after the architecture, Lasse is the daglig leder and responsible for the architecture of Recircle AS, who look at, in a way, a very creative use of reusing the materials in architecture and kind of circular economy in an incredibly exciting and creative and sustainable way. So I think it's a really fascinating company that's quite new. I don't think architects have ever really, or you definitely probably correct me, but I can't think of architects really having worked in this way before, of working creatively, demounting or destructing architecture in a sense. And I was kind of wondering how do you, does that take a big kind of flip in a way as an architect, just instead of be working with putting things together, suddenly you're working with taking them apart?
Well, thanks for the words. I suppose it is a flip, but I don't feel like I'm only working after architecture, even though that sounds kind of cool. But I'm working in between, at the end and beginning, yeah. And I suppose maybe we have more emphasis on the fact that architecture always ends in some way, whereas I guess maybe when you start out in architecture, maybe you want to create this everlasting monuments, possibly, some of you. And we have more of a systematic approach. Me, I really like to build things. I like to put things together with my hands. I like to do carpenting and welding and things like that, even though I'm not professional. But I also like to think about things systematically. And I think even ever since school, I tried to use because you've been talking about the skills that an architect learns in school. And I think we all learn different things in school. And even though we're architects, possibly, I'm not even sure if I am, but if I am, I definitely have this come out with a different set of skills and ideas than other people who are also architects. Like my master thesis was trying to use architectural method in solving the problem that there's too many buildings, and it came out as kind of like a science fiction thing. So I suppose I've enjoyed doing this kind of systematic approach for a long time, and I get to do that sort of in some way now as well, with this kind of metabolist dozer profession.
It's a good way to describe it. But I think as well there, you're kind of hitting on what I think is one of the major crises facing architecture. I think you weren't alone in your thesis. I think a lot of architects are struggling with the fact that they build, which is kind of like fundamental to the profession. I think a lot of people are seeing that, you know, we're soon reaching the point where it's becoming very difficult to build in a sustainable way. Or no, it's not, but you know, it's kind of I think a lot of people are sort of struggling with their own relationship to sustainability and maybe how they're contributing. But I guess then, Jorgen, once we come to you, that you sort of sorted that out for yourself by creating more sustainable materials to work with. So yeah, was that kind of that was a motivation for you from the beginning?
Yeah, I mean, as long as you keep planting trees, then we can build with trees, and if we also kind of make this into a system, then we will also be able to control the climate gas issues that we have in the building industry, because then we can use the trees as a carbon sequestrators, and we use the buildings and the cities as carbon storage. Or so this is in short term, this can be a very good solution for our industry to really make a change. And at the same time, we have this this is kind of happening at the same time as our software has developed and become so smart that it can speak directly to the production and to the machines. So it's very easy for us to do this. You know, if it changed from this kind of what we see as more last century's way of building, rebuilding more on site, to going back to actually going to prefabrication and actually more job for the architect. More you have to design even more, actually, because everything is done on the drawing table, and nothing is really done on the building site except from assembling these parts together. So so this change we can actually make with sustainable materials, and this is what's happening.
Yeah, that's interesting as well, that creativity can be applied to like processes like transporting, for example, and like the standard set of sizes that you have in transport dictating a type of architecture that maybe before would have just been logistical questions solved by someone else, but that architects can start to be involved creatively in that. I think that's really fascinating as well. If we kind of jump on to the next question, which I think we can just have it open to, I have a note here, wearing two hats, which I'm not sure is an English saying anymore. But if in a way, once architects start kind of branching out and taking over other parts of the profession, there is a risk that we start to lose out on the kind of tension created between, say, for example, an architect and the developer. So there, I heard an architect in Oslo talking about this, he developed an apartment building himself and was the architect and the owner of the site and the developer. And he was used to kind of fighting the developer for every single detail. You know, the door handles had to be like this, and the doors had to be this, you know, best materials and everything like that. And suddenly he was in this position where he was in both roles, and he felt like he was kind of going out of his mind because he was arguing with himself. I was wondering if any of you have any kind of comments about that from your experiences about the situation you can be in when you're suddenly in those two positions at the same time. Does anyone go on, Alexandra?
I see the problem your friend had there, but I think also architecture is, if you're building something, it's so much of a teamwork that even if you're on two sides of the table or you're wearing two hats, there are so many other hats around the table that I think there's always someone to give you kind of resistance on different issues when developing a project. But I was thinking when Jørgen was talking before about I'm not sure if it's true, but perhaps architects are more value driven than some other professions in the building industry. Because Jørgen was talking about, he was always very much into sustainability. And I think that's one of the strengths of architects, that we don't only think about the financial part of a project, but we also want to do the best we can to make it a socially sustainable project, for instance. And yeah, I think those values are really important guidelines when developing, whether it's a small project or a big one.
But I think that's what a lot of architects are struggling with in a way, is that at the same time that our profession is being pressed, we're also sort of being stretched, that we're suddenly becoming responsible for a lot of these things that other people don't want to take responsibility for, or don't see the value in fighting for. So suddenly it's us using extra time on things that maybe other people wouldn't see as important, which I think is kind of difficult as well, because we're taking on quite a lot onto our plates that, you know, we're not being paid for in a sense as well. Like I think every architect is struggling with that. You know, it's like, oh, this is 10 hours that I use for me, but I can't bill the client for that, you know? Yeah.
And I've talked to many other architects who are working on projects that it's impossible to make good architecture with the budget, or the client already decided on the volume and it's horrendous, and it still has to be done. And it's and that's why I think also it's so important for architects to talk about all these values and the complexity that we need to achieve in order to make really good projects. And I wanted to mention the Byarkitekten in Bergen, the city architect in Bergen, where they've made a strategy for the whole city for architecture, where they're really talking about architecture as a tool to achieve a lot of the goals we have as a society, including general health, socializing, mental health, and that architecture can be a tool to help the city achieve not only urban planning goals, but building the society goals. And I think the more we talk about all these added values that good architecture can do, the more we create the space for ourselves where we actually can do those things in projects.
Yeah, that's really, I think, right. So in a way, is it, because I think a lot of what architects need to do, and I find it myself with clients as well, is communicating about what an architect does. That seems to be at the start of every relationship. You need to explain what our role is. And maybe that's something that we kind of need to start doing on a larger scale as well. But that sounds really inspiring, that in Bergen that they have gotten this space to work on that. Lasse, in a way, because you're working with architects, so in a sense you're kind of helping them fulfill some of these roles, or some of these aspirations about sustainability and kind of reuse of materials, both in early stages and kind of pre-design of a project. How is it, in a way, working with architects in that sense? Because we all know how it is to work as architects, but I think it's really interesting to hear how other people kind of experience working with an architect?
Yes. You said that. Well, first of all, I just want to mention that you said earlier that it's difficult to make sustainable architecture, and maybe it's not, or maybe we have this great one solution. I would say it's impossible to build sustainable architecture within today's system, and we need to make changes to the system in order to find something that is closer to sustainable, but we're far from it, I'd say. And what we're trying to do is one small part of the puzzle, as we have other small parts of the puzzle, but we're not there, and we can't do it without a system that is in support of that. So I guess when we meet architects, we kind of have to explain ourselves in the same way that you're saying, when you're talking about how to explain your role as an architect to someone who's not an architect, I have to explain my role as an reuse person to the architect, and it's a learning process to learn how to not start off with just thinking up your dream thing and then expecting it to be produced like that, or not exactly knowing what you have to design from, but designing from availability rather than from whatever you think feels nice or good, or quality architecture. So finding that kind of balance between a vision and a need, and then what is actually there is a learning process, for sure. But yeah, it's but I agree with what you said, Alexandra, that the architects being driven. I think that's something that I can notice all the time. I think that's why I really enjoy working with architects, because there's a sense that everyone is in it to do something good and something special, and that you have like you have other values than getting over with your job and going home and collecting your salary, which sometimes hurts your health, I think, but and mine. But yeah.
Where do you think that comes from? Because it is common that architects work more, are the ones who care more, take greater responsibility, sometimes which isn't even theirs. Do you think that's something that sort of developed in the education of architecture, or is it that people who are drawn to architecture already have that in them, kind of that kind of interest?
All of those, but I also think human beings are like that, and we have a culture that, in some way, how do you say it? Fremelskere. That is like if you don't give more than some practical output in architecture school, then what fun is it going to be? You're going to learn pretty quickly that you should be somewhere else. Yeah. So, but yeah, I think like I meet a lot of crafts people who have learned that if you go out of your way to try and achieve things that aren't just the strictly necessary economical thing to do, then you're going to lose out in some way, and you're going to be the sucker. And I guess architects don't ever learn anything, because people keep on doing the same thing.
Yeah, but I mean, there's also been a discussion in Norway now about this spring about architecture education, and I think it's like art or other kind of creative professions where it's never finished, and the more you do, the better it will become, most likely. And so I've wished that I was doing accounting or something where you come to the answer and you're just like 2 lines under it and it's finished, but architecture is never finished. there's always a better solution. Even if you have a great solution, there's always a better solution. So it's this never enough game. And I think what they should teach more in schools is that at some point it is enough. But yeah, it's a balance there, and it's a balance like that. It's really hard. It's really hard in school, but it's really hard for the rest of the career. But it's something like I think all architects are struggling with. When is it enough?
Yeah, I think yeah, especially that kind of shift going from school where you always know it can be better, but at least you're sort of working with yourself or against yourself in a sense, and then stopping. But suddenly you come out into the real world and you're doing that. The real world, sorry, but you come into like a professional sense where you also need to run a business, and you're sort of stuck with this kind of clash between, of course, wanting to run a business successfully, but at the same time wanting to do the best architecture you can. And I think a lot of architects are really struggling with that, and seeing like friends who are accountants or engineers or a lot of other people who are getting just as much enjoyment from their profession, but maybe not having to pay the same high costs that architects, or maybe that's just what we are. We're kind of tortured souls and like to kind of suffer for the profession.
Perhaps. No, but I think it's in order to make good projects, you also have to practice turning off architecture. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I agree. The most difficult part is to turn it off, right? It's because you're stuck with it 24 hours, and that's what you're taught in school. You're taught to kind of seek out the problems and seek out the solutions, and I think that's kind of what also keeps driving you through your career. I kind of this problem solving issues, and I mean as you say, they never finish, because it's always something to kind of make better, and so yeah. I think that's the biggest struggle of all architects, is actually to kind of plug off the brain, plug off the work.
Yeah, because I think one of the big things you actually learn in architecture school, which is so great, is that you learn to see architecture everywhere and to notice all kinds of small details, and you can't shut your trained eyes off either. But I think that's part of the kind of diving into this profession, is that it's in everything, which makes it amazing that it's in a glass, or the design of the curb, or the flower on my window, or no, it's but what I wanted to I don't know if we're kind of drifting off a bit, perhaps with the I wanted to talk about that. Colm, you mentioned before that there's a kind of a crisis in architecture, and I just wanted to say maybe the crisis is not as big as we think, because I also think there's a lot of really cool things happening, that there are a lot of new types of projects, for instance, that are more that architects are doing, and that developers are doing, that are more attuned to the values of sustainability, for instance, and sustainable placemaking and buildings. Because before, when Centralen was refurbished, it's an old bank building, and it's really grand. And now I see really good architects working on refurbishing really crappy office buildings, and kind of finding gold, trying to dig out gold out of something that's really not amazing buildings. And I think that means that already, in sustainability wise, we're going from making the really cool projects in refurbishing within with the marmorsal and whatnot. And now we're doing the kind of average, completely average 70s apartment building reuse. So I think, and also around Norway, I think young architects and young people are starting to make business plans and refurbishing old buildings to make a place where people can come and visit, where they also bake sourdough bread. And, you know, there are all these different types of ways to make architecture now that are perhaps more related to placemaking and also to business plans. And I think that's really interesting.
Yeah, I think that there's a really kind of inspiring group of young architects developing something completely new in Norway and around the world as well. I think that kind of creativity is being applied to business plans, not just to architecture. And I think some of that is in response to, I think younger architects are finding it harder and harder to get commissions in a sense like that. The pre-requirements to build a kindergarten, for example, you need to have built a kindergarten before. And somehow that kind of bureaucracy has stunted some of the growth. And it's just been really inspiring to see a lot of these studios then deciding to just develop something themselves and kind of get that experience of building as well on projects they initiated themselves. And I think it's also kind of, I don't know, gives me a lot of optimism because it's pushing the architect back into the role of somehow someone involved in society, or as like kind of someone who wants to create social change on a very sort of small scale, you know, of like you say, a small bakery or a sauna built here, or, you know. So I think when I see those projects, I find that very inspiring and kind of makes me optimistic for the profession in the future.
And I think also in our time now, we're going more digital. If you make something really cool in, say, Stavanger, Norway, or Vardø, you can make it on Instagram. You know, I mean, you can show it on Instagram and it can go global. You know, I think we're much more in a global world with the, you know, the pandemic is a global situation. We need to handle, all of us, the environment the same. And I think there's also potential for kind of branching out from where you are, even if you live in little Norway.
Yeah, how about you, Jørgen or Lasse? Are you also experiencing that kind of international branching out, or are you?
Yeah, we definitely are. It actually started exactly the same time as the corona. So for 1 year now, we've been working in Australia with quite a lot of projects with the international group of advisors from all over the globe, but we have never met each other, right? And I've never been to Australia. So it's very interesting this how it kind of doesn't matter where you are. The only thing that matters is kind of the time of day, because a lot of these meetings are 11 o'clock at night or 5 o'clock in the morning, and so it's a bit kind of the day gets a bit turned upside down. But I think we were talking a little bit about this before we went online. Also, how this pandemic has kind of maybe made our work much easier, because we can work from wherever we want, and we can everyone knows how to kind of use this technology now. So yeah, I think that this kind of it has opened the doors for a lot for all architects actually to work in very different spaces without having to go there.
I would shoot in that for me it's quite different because we work with matter and with unique objects and unique buildings, and it matters what that is, and I need to be often in contact with that. We have tried to do our role partly over Zoom and externally, and that kind of works as well. But I think I think the knowledge that we can spread and we can raise can be global, but for me, the interesting part of the circular and reuse aspects of architecture is that it starts to matter to be in the place, and it starts to matter to deal with the specific and unique, also in terms of materials, in the way that it should matter, as in terms of site, and in terms of culture, and in terms of, it even matters like who you work with as a craftsman, because some people know how to do certain things and have learned it from one project or to another. But this process and this kind of localness, I think, is a shift that reuse architecture in a way can offer, and I think it's something kind of a different aspect and a different trend that goes kind of in a way the other way, which I think is healthy, at least after you've been on Zoom meetings for 1.5 years. And it's nice to hold the brick and, you know.
And also make something unique, right? And actually the local architecture, it's getting more kind of, I think most architecture now is, you know, you can't see which country it's from, you know. It's this might change with this kind of idea of using what you have where you are.
Yeah, because in a way that's just ground architecture to where it's from, when you start being based on these kind of radius of how far a material has traveled, which I think is a nice counterweight to maybe this globalizing effect of all these tools like Zoom we have, but also like Google Maps and, you know, every way that we can work remotely now. It's interesting that it's back to materials. One of the most kind of fundamental aspects of being an architect is somehow grounding architecture again after a long time.
Sure. Yeah, and I think like if you work well with your timber products, again, you have to have some sort of understanding, right? You can't just see it as a piece of mass. And
no, you have to know. I mean, timber, or every timber species have different properties, and will react also different in what kind of environment it is, you know. So and the climate will affect it. So it is very local, and that goes for all biological material. It's very local. It's adaptable, but it's very kind of adaptable to that local that area where it's growing. So definitely, and I think that's a good thing about working with materials, you know, as kind of the part of architectural profession is that you get so close to close to what you're building. You feel it and smell it and taste it, you know. It's very satisfying to work close with the materials. I guess you agree on this, Lasse?
yeah, I've enjoyed it. I would like to do it more, but I kind of want to do all the things. Like I want to build it and draw it and live in it and
Demolish it.
Okay, but I think that's it's kind of interesting. We've come probably through a long way, kind of side routes to some, I think, quite positive kind of outcomes, maybe about the role of architect, or the role of the architect in a way. And I feel like I was trying to be pessimistic and trying to be kind of critical, but in a way we're all very optimistic about it. And it is just about using maybe the skills we've learned and applying them creatively to whatever we work, being business, production of materials, the city, you know, everything like that. Do you agree with me? Are you all optimistic in a way about the role of the architect in the future, or do you have any other concerns, or, you know, any other ways of looking at it?
Yeah, I'm optimistic. I was super excited about what Lasse said about design from availability. I was like, oh, that's interesting. I didn't think about that before. And I think there are a lot of I think also a lot of young architects are doing more and more collaborations, which means that they can be in charge of their own time and then learn from different groups that they have in different projects, and it makes it possible to work with someone in Stockholm for a project, or it kind of the digital platforms open new doors, and at the same time I think we are seeing a lot of new ways to develop projects, and also a new awareness that we need to look at the totality of projects and really work for the sustainable part of architecture. I think other professions than architects also see it. So I think there is, what Lasse and Jørgen are working with, I mean, that's super interesting, and I think we're pushing forward in a lot of ways.
Is that the kind of, Lasse, when you're talking about like the systematic change in a way, is that kind of how you see that, or that do you see kind of hope in that it will change? When you're talking about in a way to create sustainable architecture, we need a change to the existing systems. Do you see that as something that's coming, and what's the architect's role maybe in it?
Well, the architect definitely has a big role in choosing how to build, and also I think very much back to what you were saying earlier, like that you can show, you can give a kind of value and a kind of maybe not honor, but some sort of validity to existing buildings that are seen as drab and boring, with the kind of skill set that architects have, that you can make things useful and beautiful again. And I think that's the most important skill set that we possibly some of us have, and I think we should use that for that role as much as possible, because I think that's changing the kind of the taste, but and the sort of what does architecture uphold as beautiful and important and valuable. Can we do that with what we already have? And I think if we can do that, then we're going to play a huge role. If we're going to make it in terms of stopping global climate change and in terms of dealing with the sixth extinction, in terms of dealing with the mass death biologically that we're living in, I don't know, like that's a big question for me to answer, but it's definitely not going to be a simple solution, and it's going to take some serious systematic change.
Maybe we don't need to take the responsibility for everything, but I think that our part is kind of a crucial.
I'm very positive for architecture, I can say that, but yeah.
That's good, but I think that's in a way a good way to sort of maybe stop the conversation and see if anyone else wants to join in or has any questions. Is there anyone from the audience? I'm not seeing anyone. Let's see if anyone has their hands up. Very quiet audience.
Hello.
Yeah.
Hi. Hi, I'm Harold. I'm from Stavanger. I have the pleasure of collaborating with Alexandra. I love the perspectives. It's really nice to hear, especially from Lasse. Project becoming more local. That would be a dream. I remember 2 years ago, Doga conference. One foreign speaker said, "Now we should be more local. Everything is local. Don't travel. Don't come. Don't go. Just stay." So what Lasse is talking is like music in my ears. But it's pretty long way. So my question is, do we now see kind of a trend to more local, more responsible, more storytelling, less aesthetic, less visual projects? And can we get away from this sheet-cladded projects and more solid materials that we can use 12 years later, please?
Yeah, Jürgen or Lasse or Alexander, do you have any?
Thank you. I would say yes, we are seeing that shift. I think the aesthetic is, I wouldn't say it's less aesthetic. I would say we can change the aesthetic, and we need to see the aesthetic as a political tool as well. It's a plastic that we can shape, and I think it is changing a lot. And yeah, I would say the local is not far; it's very close, and it's definitely been something that we've been experiencing lately. And once the logic of the circular economy starts to really hit, and the incentives start to really hit, I think we will see more of it, especially in architecture and building. So yeah.
I have a follow-up question also. Sorry. The municipalities, what can they do? That's important. But Alexander, please.
What can the municipalities do? They can, yeah, what can they do? I think, first of all, municipalities have to be a good role model to develop good projects. I think we too often see public projects that are not really adding too much to the public sphere around them, and I think that the municipalities can make initiatives like more circular architecture more easy to do, for instance. I know that Helen and Hard, when they were doing the Vindmøllebakken, it's really hard because it's hard to know how it works within the Plan- og bygningsloven, because it's a new way of living, for instance. So yeah, I don't know if that was a good answer, but I wanted to go back to your first question as well, because you said less aesthetics and less visuals, and I think we should do more aesthetics and more visuals, but they should be different than before. I think it's really important that we are able to tell stories with the architecture based on the aesthetics and the materiality, but perhaps beautiful now and in the future, and what we thought was beautiful before will change. And perhaps it's more, I think we're already seeing this, that people buy not just things because they're beautiful, but they also want to buy the story and the correct values when they buy something. And I think we will see that more in architecture as well.
Yeah, just see if there's any more questions or anyone else who wants to join in. I think this idea about the local as well that came in there, just as another effect of the pandemic. I feel people are more a little bit in tune with what's happening locally now, because we haven't been able to travel for so long, that suddenly I feel I know Oslo much better now than I did before this, because I've had to walk, and just the thought now of like traveling to Tokyo or something seems crazy when you've been in one place for a year and a half.
I know.
So I think that's also maybe hopefully going to have a positive effect, that we're a little bit more in tune with our local environments again, and don't maybe feel the need to travel as far as often as we did before. So that could also be something. Yeah, I'll just see if there's any more questions. No, very quiet group. Yes, but then maybe we'll call it a day there. Thank you so much to all of you for taking the time and joining this discussion. I feel we kind of touched on some really interesting topics, but also kind of wandered away into all these other really interesting niches of the profession. So I think in general, the whole thing has left me with a much more positive idea of what the role of an architect could be. Yeah, and thanks everyone as well for listening from home, and thanks to OAF for organizing. Okay.
Thank you. I want to give like a last shout out to Andy Holt in Arkitektopia for having lunches with me and discussing reuse architecture before I started doing this kind of stuff. So,
any other shout outs from Stavanger or Jørgen?
Shout out to all the architects, all the yeah, professionals working out there. Keep on working.
Okay, so I'll send a shout out to all the young architects, and and don't be scared to find your own way. And your architecture dream could be very different from the standard one, or the one you think you should have. I think that's important. Experiment.
Great. Okay, thank you so much, guys. Let's leave it there.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.